Imagine the greatest empire the world has ever seen. An empire so powerful, it felt like it would last forever. An empire that built roads across mountains, laws across oceans, and armies that made the earth shake. Now imagine watching it fall. Not in a single moment. Not in a single battle. But slowly and quietly, like a fire dying in the dark, and no one noticing until the smoke was already everywhere. This is that story. Introduction of the world. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the city of Rome. Not the ruins you see in photographs today. Not the broken columns and cracked stone. But Rome at its height. Alive, breathing and magnificent. It is the 2nd century AD. The Roman Empire stretches from the cold, grey cliffs of Britain in the north, all the way to the burning sands of Egypt in the south. From the forests of Germania in the west, to the ancient rivers of Mesopotamia in the east. Over 60 million people live under the Roman flag. 60 million. Cities hum with commerce. Markets overflow with spices from India, silk from China, grain from Africa. Aqueducts carry fresh water across valleys and hills, delivering it straight into the homes of ordinary people. Roman roads, arrow straight, perfectly built, stretch for over 400,000 kilometers across the known world. And at the center of it all, like the heartbeat of civilization itself, is the city of Rome. 1 million people packed into a city of marble and noise and ambition. The Colosseum roars with crowds. The Forum buzzes with senators arguing, merchants trading, and philosophers debating. The smell of bread, smoke, and salt fills the air. This is not just a city. This is the center of the world. The Romans believe, truly believe, that their empire is eternal. They call it Roma Eterna or Eternal Rome. They build it in stone, so it will last. They write it in law, so it will endure. They carve it in marble, so it will never be forgotten. And for centuries, they are right. But nothing lasts forever. Nothing. Build up. The first cracks did not look like cracks at all. They looked like small problems, manageable problems. The kind of problems that empires like Rome solve every generation, dust off their hands, and move on. The first warning sign came not from an enemy outside the walls. It came from within. In the year 180 AD, Emperor Marcus Aurelius died. Now, this name might not mean much to you today. But to the Romans, Marcus Aurelius was everything. He was the philosopher emperor. The man who ruled the greatest empire on earth, and still found time each night to write down his private thoughts. Thoughts about duty, about kindness, about how to be a good human being. He was, by almost every measure, Rome's greatest ruler. And when he died, the man who took the throne was his son, Commodus. If Marcus Aurelius was the best Rome ever had, Commodus was perhaps the worst. He was vain, cruel, and obsessed with gladiatorial combat, not as a spectator, but as a participant. He would dress up as Hercules, walk into the arena, and fight against wounded animals and disabled soldiers. He renamed the city of Rome after himself. He forced the Senate to call him a god while he still breathed. He was, in the words of his own people, a disgrace. He was assassinated in 192 AD, strangled in his bath by a wrestler hired by his own servants. And with his death began something terrifying. A power vacuum. In a single year, one single year, Rome had 5 different emperors. They came and went like storms. Generals seized power with armies, senators plotted in shadows. Soldiers put their loyalty up for sale to the highest bidder. The empire was watching its own leadership tear itself apart. But most people didn't see it as collapse. Not yet. They called it a rough patch. They called it politics. They had no idea what was coming. Rising tension. Now the empire enters a long, dark corridor. We are moving now into the 3rd century AD. Historians would later call it the crisis of the 3rd century. It lasted from 235 AD to 284 AD, 50 years of almost uninterrupted chaos. 50 years. In those 50 years, Rome had over 50 different emperors. 50 emperors in 50 years. Do the math, most of these men lasted less than a year. Many were killed by the very soldiers who had placed them on the throne. Power became not a responsibility, but a death sentence. And while Rome's leaders were killing each other in palace corridors, the world outside the walls was changing. The Germanic tribes were pushing harder on the northern borders. The Goths, the Vandals, the Alemanni, these were not simple barbarian raiders anymore. They were organized and dangerous. They had watched Rome for generations, learned its weaknesses, and they were hungry. From the east came the Sassanid Persian Empire, a new, resurgent power, proud and aggressive, hungry to reclaim old glory. In 260 AD, something happened that shocked the Roman world to its core. The Emperor Valerian was captured, not killed. A Roman emperor, the living symbol of Roman supremacy, taken prisoner by Persia. The humiliation was almost impossible to comprehend. Statues were torn down, people wept in the streets. Some Romans began to wonder privately, in hushed voices, in rooms with locked doors, was Rome still invincible? Was Rome still Rome? Meanwhile, something quieter was happening. Something more dangerous than any army. The economy was dying. Rome's wealth had always come from conquest. New territory meant new resources, new slaves, and new tax revenue. But the empire had stopped expanding. There was nowhere left to go. The borders were being pushed back, not forward. With no new wealth coming in, but massive armies and massive infrastructure to maintain, the emperors did the only thing they could think of. They debased the currency. In simple terms, they started making coins with less silver in them. Coins that used to be 90% pure silver became 50%, then 20%, and then barely 5%. People noticed, merchants started refusing imperial coins, trade broke down and prices exploded. A bag of grain that once cost a few coins now cost hundreds. Ordinary Romans, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the soldiers' families, began to feel it in their bones. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The main event. And then came the plague. Not a single plague, multiple plagues. Wave after wave of disease, rolling through the empire like a dark tide that never fully receded. The Antonine Plague began in 165 AD. It may have been smallpox or measles, no one is completely certain, but the result was catastrophic. It tore through legions stationed on distant frontiers. It crept into cities along trade routes. In some parts of the empire, it killed up to 30% of the population. 30%, it's a very large number. In Rome alone, at its worst, people were dying at the rate of 2,000 a day. 2,000 people every single day. The streets that had once rung with commerce and laughter fell silent. Doors stayed closed. Bodies had to be carried out of the city in wagons because there were too many to bury quickly. Temples were overwhelmed with offerings from terrified citizens begging the gods for protection. The gods did not answer. And the plague was not done. In 249 AD, another plague arrived. The plague of Cyprian, named after a Christian bishop who wrote about it in chilling detail. It killed 5,000 people a day in Rome at its peak. It lasted for 20 years. 20 years of sickness, 20 years of fear. The psychological damage was almost worse than the physical. Romans had always believed the gods protected them. The city's greatness was proof of divine favor. But now the gods seemed silent, or angry, or simply gone. People began searching for meaning in new places. They turned to mystery religions, to Eastern cults, and increasingly, to a new faith that was spreading quietly through the lower classes of the empire, a faith that preached comfort for the suffering, dignity for the poor, and hope beyond this world. Christianity. It was one more sign that the old Rome, the confident, certain, victorious Rome, was changing in ways no one fully understood. Intense description of what happened. Let us stand in Rome on a winter night in the late 3rd century. The city is still immense, still extraordinary, the Colosseum still stands and the aqueducts still flow. The legions are still out there, somewhere, holding the borders. But walk through the streets and you feel it. The silence where there used to be noise. The empty shops where merchants once fought for customers. The thin faces and the hollow eyes. the soldiers begging outside temples because they haven't been paid in months. Wander to the harbor at Ostia and you'll notice fewer ships arriving. The great merchant vessels that once came loaded with the wealth of the world, grain from Egypt, ivory from Africa, spices from the East, there are fewer now. The sea routes are less safe. The trading networks that made Rome rich are fraying. Walk to the forum and you'll see politicians arguing, always arguing. Because the currency is worthless, because the army needs paying, because 3 generals are each claiming they are the rightful emperor, because the Goths are inside the borders again. Go to the countryside, and the picture is even darker. Farms abandoned. Villages emptied. The grand estates of wealthy senators still function. They've become self-sufficient little worlds unto themselves, with their own craftsmen and guards and food supplies. They no longer need Rome's markets. They no longer need Rome's protection. They are becoming something new. Something that history would later call feudalism. The Roman world is reorganizing, not by design, not by plan, but by desperation and by survival. And at the edges of everything, at the frozen rivers of the Rhine and the Danube, at the sun-scorched deserts of Syria and Mesopotamia, the pressure never stops. Tribe after tribe presses against the borders. The legions push back. But the legions are thinner now, fewer Roman-born soldiers. More mercenaries from the very tribes they're supposed to be fighting. Men who are loyal to their general or to their paycheck, but not necessarily to the idea of Rome. The idea of Rome is beginning to feel like exactly that. Aftermath. In 284 AD, a tough, brilliant general named Diocletian seized the throne and refused to let go. He looked at the empire he had inherited and understood something that previous emperors had refused to admit. Rome was too big for one man to govern. So he did something radical, he split it. He created a system with 4 rulers, 2 senior emperors called Augusti, 2 junior emperors called Caesars. He moved the capital away from Rome itself, to cities closer to the frontiers where the real threats lived. He reformed the currency, he reformed the army, and he reformed the tax system. He was brilliant, he was ruthless, and he bought Rome perhaps another century of life. But he could not undo what had been done. The split he created would never fully heal. In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine made it official. He founded a new city on the banks of the Bosphorus, where Europe meets Asia, and named it after himself, Constantinople. He made it the new capital of the Eastern Empire. And slowly, inevitably, the great Roman world divided into 2. The Western Roman Empire, centered still on Rome itself, grew weaker and weaker. The economy contracted, the population shrank, and the armies grew thin. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoths, a Germanic tribe, sacked Rome, walked into the Eternal City, walked through the streets of the capital of the world, and took what they wanted. Saint Jerome, one of the greatest Christian scholars of the age, wrote these words when he heard the news: "My voice sticks in my throat. As I dictate, sobs choke my utterance." The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. The whole world held its breath. And in 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, a young, frightened boy named Romulus Augustulus. The last emperor, the last man to bear the title that had meant the world. He was exiled to a castle in southern Italy. Not killed, exiled. As if even the conquerors understood that something sacred had ended, and killing him would somehow make it worse. The Western Roman Empire was gone. 1,000 years after Rome had become a republic, gone. Historical impact. What happened after Rome fell? The lights went out, not metaphorically, literally. The road networks that Rome had maintained fell into disrepair. Without maintenance, the roads cracked and broke and were swallowed by forests. Trade that had flowed along those roads dried up. Cities that had lived on that trade shrank. Some were abandoned entirely. Literacy rates, which Rome had pushed surprisingly high for the ancient world, collapsed. Libraries burned or crumbled, books rotted, knowledge that had been carefully gathered and preserved for centuries was lost. In Western Europe, life expectancy dropped, and populations shrank. The sophisticated urban civilization that Rome had built, with its running water and heated public baths and organized justice, faded back into something simpler, harder, and more brutal. Historians call this period the Dark Ages. And while that term is debated, there were still moments of beauty, of creativity, of faith even in the darkest centuries. The label captures something real. Something enormous had been lost. The Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, survived for another 1,000 years. We know it today as the Byzantine Empire. It preserved much of Roman law, Roman culture, and Roman art. It kept the flame alive even as the West went dark. But even it eventually fell. In 1453 AD, Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Turks, and the last ember of Rome went out. Yet Rome never truly died. Look around you. The language you are watching this video in, English, is built on Latin, the language of Rome. More than half of all English words have Latin roots. The laws that govern most of the world today, the idea of innocent until proven guilty, the idea of equal justice, the idea of citizenship, these are Roman inventions. The calendar you use, the months, January, March, July, August, all are Roman. The architecture of government buildings, courthouses, parliament halls, the columns, the domes, the grand staircases, all Roman. Rome did not just fall, Rome transformed. It became the world we live in. Philosophical reflection about humanity. But there is a deeper question here, a question that goes beyond dates and emperors and battles. Why do great things fall? Rome was not destroyed by one enemy. It was not defeated in one war. It was not brought down by one bad decision. It fell slowly, over centuries, under the weight of 1,000 small failures. Economic mismanagement, political instability, inequality between the rich and the poor. Leaders who cared more about power than about the people they led. Citizens who stopped believing in shared values. A culture that grew comfortable and forgot the discipline and sacrifice that had built it. Does any of that sound familiar? History has a way of whispering to us across centuries if we are willing to listen. Every great civilization in human history, Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire, has followed a similar arc: rise, peak, and decline. None of them believed it would happen to them. All of them had reasons to think they were different. They were all wrong. Rome's fall is not just a story about the past. It is a warning. It is a mirror. It is asking us, what are we building? What are we protecting? And are we paying attention to the cracks, the small, quiet, manageable-looking cracks, before they become something we can no longer repair? The Romans did not see it coming. Not because they were stupid, but because it is very hard to see the collapse of the world you live in when you are standing inside it. When you are used to the noise, the silence feels normal. When you are used to the roads, you don't notice the cracks growing wider. When you are used to the flag flying, you don't imagine the day it will not be there. That is the tragedy of Rome. And it is the tragedy of every great thing humanity has ever built. We build, we reach the sky, and we believe we are eternal. And then, slowly, we forget how we got there. Let's rewind up our today's topic. Somewhere in the ruins of Rome today, if you walk through the Forum on a quiet morning, before the tourists arrive, before the noise begins, you can stand in the silence and feel something. Something that is hard to name. The marble columns, broken but still standing. The ancient cobblestones, worn smooth by millions of footsteps across 2,000 years. The arches, cracked but holding. The grass growing through the floor of what was once the greatest empire on earth. And if you stand there long enough, you feel the weight of it. The weight of all that was built here. All that was dreamed here. All that was lost here. 1 million ordinary people once walked these streets, soldiers missing home. Mothers worrying about their children, merchants counting coins. Children chasing each other through the market. People who laughed and cried and loved and feared just like us. They didn't know their world was ending. How could they? They were just living their lives. And that is perhaps the most human thing about this story. The Roman Empire did not fall to monsters. It fell to time and silence and the slow, quiet forgetting of who we are and what we owe each other. The eternal city is still here. Broken, beautiful, and breathing. A reminder that nothing lasts forever. And that everything we build, every road, every law, every dream, is only as strong as the people willing to protect it. Remember that. The next time you see a crack in the wall, don't look away. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or see the world a little differently, then this channel is built exactly for you. Every week, we bring history to life like this. Not as dates to memorize, but as human stories to feel. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. And if you want to go deeper, leave a comment below. Tell me, what part of Rome's story stayed with you? What do you think we can learn from it today? I'll see you in the next one.